Welcome to the American Reformer Podcast, hosted by Josh Abbotoy and Timon, Cline. Our mission is to promote a vigorous Christian approach to the cultural challenges of our day, rooted in the rich tradition of Protestant social and political thought.
All right, welcome back, everyone, to the American Reformer Podcast. The usual host here, Timon, Cline, editor-in-chief. And I'm joined by a guest today and a return guest, which is the bravest kind. There's only a few of you, John, that have dared to come on twice. And my guest is John Wilsey. I think we had you on maybe it was last year to talk about Dulles, right?
It was a year ago. It was exactly a year ago. Yeah.
Well, that reminds me, actually, I was just in D.C. and I flew into Dulles. And I was dealing with a rental car situation. So I called in and said, if there's something that's wrong with the reservation. So I have someone whose first language is not English talking to me. And I said, I'm in Dulles and I need to make sure this car's, and they said, Dulles, Texas. I said, no, the airport in Washington, D.C. And she goes, duels. So it's like this hilarious. I was like, yep, duels. And then it made me think of you because of the Dulles book. So
that is so funny.
Yep, let's go with duels. That is one pronunciation.
That was his father's nickname at Princeton.
Really?
Duels.
So maybe,
So there you go.
She actually knew.
Yeah. Maybe she's read my book.
She's read your book, and the joke was on me.
Yeah.
Oh, anyway, so we had you on, which I loved that book. It's fascinating, and I liked our conversation. So we thought we would have you on again because you keep writing books. And I think this came out in the spring. The current book
came out in April.
And it's you can correct me on the exact. It's Conservative Primer on Religious Freedom. Or did I flip the?
The title is
subtitle.
Religious Freedom: A Conservative Primer.
Okay, yep. Excellent. So tell the audience a little bit about why this book. Was there a sort of hole in the discussion that you saw that you wanted to where your contribution is coming in? What was the impetus for writing this and writing it now?
Well, I think that when I conceived of the book, I wanted to write on religious freedom, but I didn't want to write a treatise on religious freedom because there's plenty of those around, and I didn't think we needed that. But I was also struck by the fact that there's a big difference between the conservatives that I knew as a teenager and as a young man in my 20s, and those of now. I don't think that young people have as many conservatives to look up to and to emulate and to be inspired by. Now, we're talking about this just a week after Charlie Kirk's assassination, and Charlie Kirk is an exception to that. But back in my day, in the 80s and the 90s, we had a whole plethora of conservative figures that we looked up to, and not just Reagan, although Reagan was principal among them. But I was a huge fan myself in high school of George Shultz, who was Reagan's Secretary of State, and I thought he was awesome. I loved Oliver North. I loved watching those. Tape recordings of his appearances before whatever committee it was, some Senate committee. I can't remember what now. But he just turned the tables on him. I mean, they're all Democrats, and he just completely demolished them. And it was a thing of beauty. So in short, I wanted to talk about conservatism, and I wanted to talk about religious freedom and how we view religious freedom from a conservative perspective. And that's what the book's about.
What would you say, maybe for, I was born in the 90s, early 90s. And of course we have the Zoomers, which was like Charlie Kirk's predominant generational audience. and I guess he was 31, so he's like barely in that category himself. So he's the sort of elder statesman, What would you say, accepting Kirk, is the big difference between the conservatives that inspired you in the 80s and 90s, doing this sort of public intellectual combat at a high level, and now, and like why don't we have them? Do you think, based on your kind of assessment of the landscape?
Yes. Well, I think the people that were inspiring to me in my younger days, they just seemed to be so courageous against leftist enemies and opponents, both on the international stage and at home. In political terms, leaders like Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, they had their opponents on the left here, and then they had the Soviet Union, which was committed to our absorption into their system. And so they had to be extremely clear thinkers, and they had to be very courageous because they stood up to existential threats to their own society and to the international order. But today, in the absence of a bipolar world, after the Cold War was over with, we turned on ourselves, and conservatives became interested more in the culture wars. And culture wars are less interesting than actual wars of ideas between opposing ideologies where the stakes are so high. And so what's produced is sort of moral majority figures. Of course, they do emerge in the 80s and 90s, but they continued on into well into the 2000s. The failure of the war on terror, our failures in Afghanistan and Iraq, which were unforced errors, and with unspeakably tragic consequences that we still don't really understand, that were born by a generation of people that were looking for, I think, conservative voices to follow. And in the lack of those, we get people like Mitt Romney, not an inspiring figure. And, Mitt Romney, the task that a person like Mitt Romney had in 2012 was so desperately important for what would follow. And he just flubbed it.
Yeah.
And instead we got second term of Obama, which just drove home a critical theory and Marxist ideology into our society, so that young people now have these things as assumptions and starting points and points of departure. And so the failure of conservatives after, say, 2000, 2004, it had a huge, it was really consequential. It wasn't just like, it's kind of like when Barry Goldwater, the opportunity he had in 1964, and when he lost, it ushered in just one of the most infamous periods of leftist takeover of politics and society. And something similar happened in 2012. We've missed these opportunities, and I say that in the book that the real the people that have to suffer the most as a result of this is young people. Anyway, I'm talking too much about that, but I think all those things factored in as the reason why I wanted to write the book.
Okay. No, I think that's good, and it's orienting. We've talked to a few people recently, we should say, that have more, they lived through more of this than the rest of us. We were doing the same with Hunter Baker recently. We were talking to him about his book, boomers take a lot of flack is part of the point. Now people are frustrated with them, but conservative boomers have good reason for being the way that they are now because of what they lived through. That's part of our point is 80s and 90s were different. We don't remember them. Most of us were at best kids. but there's a reason for, at one point, a certain kind of optimism and a particular posture and emphases and focus and all these things. And of course, a movement, if it's going to be organic and have life, it has to adjust, has to change in certain ways, but you don't have to violently repudiate your, sort of elders in this way. Correction should be a little more, a little softer in some ways. But anyway,
they still can't drive.
They still can't drive.
Being behind a boomer on the highway is still a very
They still can't drive. And where I live, there's there's an exceptional amount of boomers. I live around in South Florida, and not a single one of them can drive.
Yeah. They can't drive.
No, it's terrible. I had one driving down the wrong side of the road head on at me the other day.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And
wow, that'll get you attention.
Practice, but only at driving slow too. So to like 25 and a 45,
Right.
Anyway, we love our boomers. We must help them. We must love them.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So this is kind of the part of what you're wanting to communicate, part of the impetus for the book. How does that play into the actual thesis of what you're trying to communicate? As you said, it's not a treatise, but what are you trying to convey on the specific topic of religious freedom from this milieu?
Yeah, it's not a treatise, but it is an argument, and in the argument, I have a thesis.
That's good.
Believe it or not, I have it. I do have a thesis. And my thesis is that conservatives are in the best position to maintain what Tocqueville described when he came to America, the harmony between the spirit of religion and the spirit of freedom. And the reason why that is because conservatives conserve. That's what we do. Liberals, people on the left, are less interested in conserving tradition. They're less interested in the past. They see society in general terms. They see society as applying only to the living, not like Burke described it, as a contract between the dead, the living, and the yet to be born. So that tradition of harmony between the spirit of religion and the spirit of liberty, in Tocqueville's words, that's a tradition that has prevailed in America since the colonial foundings, and conservatives are in the best position to maintain it. Now, will we do it? Do we have the will to do it? I say, yes, we still have the will to do it because we have good reason to do it. So those are the ideas I'm trying to advance in the book, and I hope I was successful at it.
So, of course, say more about what, at least in the Tocquevillian vein, this harmony means. How's it cash out to have this balance between what you might expect if you laid out like the structure of the sentence to people today is a harmony or between, you might say, like government and liberty, or control and liberty, order and liberty, these things, but specifically religion and freedom, or religion and liberty. What does this harmony look like or mean to Tocqueville, insofar as he's accurately capturing the American spirit and attitude?
Yeah. Well, that is the guts of the book. The issue you just put forth is what I address in the chapters after the introduction. I start with trying to define what conservatism is, which it may be an impossible task. I mean, how many conferences, forums, articles,
all of
books,
them. all the books, every single one.
Pose the question, what is conservatism?
Yes.
And so what's interesting about all those things is that there's never really ever an answer given. At least
people would have less jobs if an answer, if definitive answer came forth. You'd have a lot of people out of jobs for a while.
you make a salient point there. So I give a definition, and I get my definition from Peter Viereck, who was a post-war conservative, a contemporary of Buckley and Meyer, and the fusionist and National Review crowd. This is what Viereck said: The conservative principles par excellence are proportion and measure, self-expression through self-restraint, preservation through reform, humanism and classical balance, a fruitful nostalgia for the permanent beneath the flux, and a fruitful obsession for unbroken historical continuity. These principles together create liberty, a liberty built not on the quicksand of adolescent defiance, but on the bedrock of ethics and law. From there, developing out that definition, from there, I talk about conservatism and the imagination, conservatism and the nation and our nationality, conservatism and ordered liberty, conservatism and history, conservatism and religion, and lastly, conservatism and religious freedom. So being a conservative is less a political ideology. Conservatism is not a political ideology. Conservatism is a disposition, as Edmund Burke described it, Russell Kirk and others. But I also want to add something to that, and that is that conservatism is an aspiration. You and I would say that we are conservatives, but are we true conservatives? No, we're not. We're on the path to a true conservatism through the improvement of the soul, the improvement of the mind, the improvement of the body, even. In an aspirational conservative disposition, we remember we stand on the shoulders of those who went before us. We receive an inheritance from them that is good, that we have been blessed by, and that we have enjoyed. And it's our duty to steward that inheritance and prepare it to pass down to the next generation so that they can also enjoy it and that they can steward it and continue to pass it down. And that harmony between religion and liberty, for us to have liberty, Tocqueville observed that you have to have you have to have a culture that respects religion. It doesn't have to be a Christian nation. It doesn't have to be dogmatic, but it has to have mores that are informed by religion, and by, of course, religion he meant Christianity. He said that there are many sects, there are many denominations in America, but they all agree on mores, on morality. And so what he has observed about 1830s America is that America was Christian in the sense of its mores and its customs and its conventions. And that was the source of its maintenance of liberty. Other than that, without those things, the democratic nature of American society would tend towards a majoritarian tyranny.
With the and of course, the people. Well, let's phrase this question for you. To what extent do the people have to be cognizant of this, right? Rather than sort of on autopilot, you might say, perpetuating the mores in a sense, just because you are practicing them, but not quite conscious of their existence because you're the fish in water, but more importantly, the source. So the necessity. What's the necessity of being conscious of the source, which requires maintenance itself in order for this to be maintained? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think it's indispensable. You can't go on autopilot. And that's an important point that Tocqueville makes. And I think I talk about it in the book somewhere, that and a difference between equality and liberty. Most people in our culture think that they're synonymous terms. Equality and liberty are the same thing. And Tocqueville says, no, equality and liberty are completely different. Equality tends towards tyranny, and liberty is on the other side of that. Equality is easy. Equality yields short-term gains. You can go on autopilot, as it were, as you described it, to have it. And Americans would be much more willing to sacrifice their freedom over their equality They're going to keep their equality. They're not going to sacrifice their equality, even in the name of liberty. But liberty requires vigilance. It requires patience. It requires active citizenship. And it requires sacrifice. Yeah. And so in order to maintain liberty, citizens have to be cognizant of the sources of liberty and what conditions in society are necessary to obtain for liberty to flourish. And if they're not, if they just go on autopilot, then what you will have in our democratic Republican system is a majoritarian tyranny.
What I mean, this is something that many of our listeners will kind of already understand, but a shocking amount of people don't. I mean, you already mentioned that we've flattened liberty into equality, made them. I would agree the initial move, at least, is to make them synonymous or as like inseparable pairs. But really, what's happened is probably the actual concept of liberty at this point has been replaced by equality. You don't hear people talking about in kind of original terms, these things. No. It's equality, and it's where I was having a conversation with on a different show this morning about speech has been totally flattened into expression, which is a totally different thing. So, but in both, and you can see this all kinds of different liberties flattened or transformed into a kind of foreign concept. But with liberty itself, kind of the most basic level, we have to know if it's not synonymous with equality, or it's not transferable into kind of all these other things, these other rights we have invented over the 20th century through the penumbras of the Constitution. What is it? What are we actually talking about with the liberty that needs to be that requires maintenance in this sense?
Are you asking what is liberty?
Yeah. What's the proper understanding of liberty, both from the founders on and up through as Tocqueville observes these things, if it's not equality and if it's not pure license, what is it? Like, what are we actually talking about when people, throw these words around?
Liberty, in the way that the founders expressed it, had a positive and a negative application to it, and a positive and a negative meaning to it. On the negative side, it's very simply a lack of coercion from top down. The government can't do such and such things. Think Bill of Rights, think First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or inhibiting the free exercise thereof. So that would be a negative expression of what freedom is. The government, the coercive power, cannot apply itself to inhibit the citizens' pursuit of a religious life. But it also has a positive expression. That is that citizens have within their by their own lights, according to their talents and their aspirations and their property, have the freedom to pursue the good as they see it. And for example, James Madison talks about it in terms of justice, that the aim of a civil society is to promote justice. John Locke, I know John Locke is a friend of American Reformer.
Of course, and he's a good Protestant. He's a good Protestant. All good Protestants are friends of American Reformer.
Yeah, he's an okay Protestant.
He's probably a Socinian, but he's probably actually a heretic. But he had some good things to say.
But at least he wasn't a papist.
He wasn't a papist. That's the only thing we care about.
He described freedom in terms of property. That you are free to the extent that you are able to acquire, maintain your property without any interference from not just the state, but even fellow citizens. And the way he thinks about property, as you and your listeners know, is more than just material things. It's also your ideas and your beliefs, convictions, and your person and your family and these kinds of things. So a positive and a negative understanding of what liberty is. And furthermore, that in the Western tradition more broadly, so broadening out from just the founding, order precedes liberty. Liberty does not precede order. So without a just order, liberty degenerates into license. Now, I want to say one other thing about this, and this is something I did not talk about in the book, but it's something I've been reflecting on since the book came out, and that is a romantic view of freedom. In other words, a view of freedom that comes out of the tradition of Romanticism on the continent of Europe, especially. Think Rousseau and his opening lines of Social Contract. Man is born free and everywhere is in chains. What does he mean by that? Well, social convention, tradition, custom, rule of law, these are the chains that enslave us. We're born into the world without these things. And so what we need to do is burst the bonds. Think Psalm 2 almost.
Mm-hmm.
We need to burst our bonds asunder so that we can just live according to our own potential, fulfill our own potential, transcend limitations, transcend all those things that stand in our way of fulfilling our individual, or who we truly are, as we might say, in the 21st century. So we can trans kids, and we can
self-actualization. It's great.
Yeah,
and you'll be forced to self-actualize if you're not doing it fast enough. You become the tranny you were always meant to be.
Yeah, I mean, what got me thinking about that was last year when our 46th president was running for his reelection campaign, and that turned out to be a flop. So in very free and democratic processes, the Democratic Party, which is the champion of liberty, ordered liberty, named his successor without any appeal to their own party, the vice president. And the vice president's presidential campaign was predicated on freedom. Remember that?
Mm-hmm.
But how did they think about freedom? Well, they said freedom to kill your children, freedom to trans your kids, freedom to impose your understanding of something called kindness on everybody else in the entire country, freedom to eliminate borders, and anybody in the world can come here no matter how egregious of a criminal you are, and just freedom from all law. I mean, it was the definition of license, and it was the actual political expression. The clearest political expression, I think, of romantic freedom that I have ever witnessed in history or in my own life. And so I think that the best way to think maybe about freedom, the way that it's been historically understood, and in terms of how the founders conceived of it, is contrast it with what people understand freedom to mean generally in our culture now, which is self-actualization and the bursting of the bonds of limitations. You can go change the world, Timon. Go change the world. You can do it. No, you can't. You can't change the world. You can't. You can't. You're not going to do it, Timon. Sorry. If you had dreams of that this morning, I'm here to dash them for you.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for keeping me moored. My ambitions. I just want to change America. So, not the world.
Well, you and I can do it together, but you can't do it by yourself.
Yeah, I think so. It takes a village.
It takes a village.
Right. So, and then the thing that even in this is my assessment that I find in a lot of conservative discussion of these topics, there's correctives out there on what the founders meant by liberty, as we've already been discussing, how these things are supposed to go together. Until recently, and there's more and more of it now, has been it's sort of been an inattentiveness to the preconditions that you've already alluded to, and we might say the particularization of our expression of these things. So, and this gets to, other liberal sort of progressive sort of enthusiasms over the past several decades, that all this is like readily transferable to the rest of the world. The way our particular way of life is transferable. The way our expectations of our liberties, the particular articulation of them and practice of them and so on and so forth. It's all transferable. And then it's like reverse transferable too. You can also have totally like overhaul the population and everything will stay the same. You're still going to have all the same liberties, understandings of these things and so on and so forth. So it's been on both sides. I've seen, and again, until recently, very few correctives in this way from conservatives that I've found. And then with the left, of course, running, sort of rampant in this regard. And my point is like sort of drawing it back to Tocqueville. I mean, before or in the midst of having discussions of the liberties of the Americans, is extensive discussion, especially at the beginning, of like what the American people are, where they come from and like how they fit together, what they're what they imported and what they've created, amongst themselves, which I would say is like a precondition then to explain. I think he says this early when he's talking about the Anglo-Americans, like you need to understand these people before you can understand their political behavior, I guess you could say. How does all that fit into this, or how should it fit into it? How should we try to offer correctives in this way, or at least emphasize again this aspect of like, look, this doesn't just spring out of the ether. And as all the founders sort of recognize, there's certain preconditions in the people themselves in order to have any of this. Otherwise, you should go a totally different route, in terms of your governance and political life.
Yes. Well, I treat that in a chapter I entitled Conservatism and Religion, in which I talk a lot about human nature being in a tension between, Psalm 8, we're divine image bearers. We're created a little lower than the angels, or a little lower than God, according to your biblical translation. In tension with Isaiah 59 and Romans 3 and Romans 6, we're fallen in sin. And that human nature is common to all of us. It transcends space, time, historical circumstances. That's who we are. Both of those things. So we do have dignity, but we're also fallen and we're depraved, and we seek among maybe perhaps all things more than anything. We seek power. That's what James Madison famously built his idea of his defense of the Constitution on. Federalist 10, Federalist 51, most famously. Those are the two Federalist papers that most people have read, and thankfully so, because they're wonderful, they're excellent, and they do provide the basis of a political theory on theological anthropology, which is absolutely necessary. So in terms of understanding who we are, we understand what our nature is and how our nature tends towards certain goals, certain political goals. Therefore, balance is necessary in a society between the interests of the individual and the interests of the society, starting from the local and working your way up to the national, not the other way around. Another thing I think from your question and from your observation is that in knowing who we are, we have to know what our past has been. And so I have another chapter called Conservatism and History, that asks the question, how do conservatives read history, as opposed to how liberals or how the progressive left would read history? Generally speaking, I'm speaking generally. I know there's exceptions. If my father is listening to this, he's hard left and he's a lifelong lefty, and he likes to read history. So I know that there's exceptions to this. However, in general, the left does not value history as much as conservatives value history, because the left doesn't see tradition as something to which society ought to heed, because change is something good because in its own sake. Think Barack Obama, 2008. Or think Bill Clinton in 1992, those presidential campaigns. Remember Clinton? Well, you don't remember this because you weren't probably born yet, but
he
said over and over again.
Yeah.
You probably weren't paying attention, but he said over and over again in his campaign, "It is time for a change." And unfortunately, as much as I admired him and respected him as a man, George Bush Sr. never had a good argument against that. He always said, well, change is part of life, but change is not necessarily a good thing. That was all he ever said. So come on, man, you can do better than that. But conservatives revere tradition. Conservatives understand that who we are is a direct result of the people that went before us. And I think a lot of people in American society today look at history like they watch Star Wars. Star Wars is this cultural benchmark, right? And what is the philosophical or historical view that Star Wars puts forward? A Manichaean conflict between good and evil. You got the good guys and you got the bad guys. The good guys are like Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, Princess Leia, Obi-Wan, and whatever bad things they have in their characters, they're just kind of cute, you know? Mm-hmm. Like Luke is a brat at first. Han Solo was a smuggler and he dealt with seedy characters, but then, he comes good in the end. But the bad people are they're really bad. I mean, they murder, they steal, they destroy whole planets. And then at the end of the Star Wars, you kids call it Episode 4, but my generation just called it Star Wars. At the end of the Episode 4, what happens? You have this very satisfying ending where the good guys blow up the Death Star. And history doesn't really work itself out like that. It's not really good guys versus bad guys. But the left loves to look at American history as good guys versus bad guys. So indigenous people are the good guys. Mm-hmm. Think Disney's Pocahontas. The European colonizers are definitely the bad guys. Mm-hmm. White Protestant men are always the bad guys. Brown people, black people, marginalized people are always the good guys. There's never any sins that they commit. Histories of the Civil War are particularly bad at this. Robert E. Lee was a traitor. The Confederates were all traitors, full stop. Or even my favorite, they were proto-Nazis.
Yes, of course. Who isn't? Yeah. Who isn't?
Who isn't? Like, we could sit and go on and on and on with this. And then, of course, at the end of the Civil War, they blow up the Death Star, the Confederacy.
Atlanta.
So
Atlanta was the Death Star.
yeah, right. So I'm convinced that liberals look at history the same way that they watch Star Wars. But that's not how history works. It's not how life works. The Death Star isn't going to be blown up until the Lord Jesus returns. Then the Death Star gets blown up. But it's not going to be blown up by human effort. And conservatives understand this when we read history. We're really looking into a mirror when we read history. So I talk about John Lukács, a historian that, I just recommend everywhere I go, every chance I get. His book, Historical Consciousness, is just a masterpiece of how to read history. It's a big, thick book, but it's extremely accessible and it's extremely relatable. Anyway, so I'm sorry to keep going on and on.
No, I think that's, and I'm always struck. I agree with you the way that yes, it's all cartoons for the left and even just a lot of regular Americans, because that's what's fed into them is it's comic book strips is like history, so it's all very clean and neat. And, it's good wizards versus bad wizards. And single people are, it's just Hitler. Hitler does all of it. It's like there's no, it's not complicated at all. And so then all you got to do, your use of history is just to always find Hitler and you'll be fine, because he's like an archetype. I saw someone the other day, maybe Orrin McIntyre saying, the Nazi thing is like a secularized Satan and demons. You have to have that function. Something has to function that way. So, you have to be able to use something like that to dehumanize like your enemies. So that's why they're fascists. They're Nazis. That's why Trump is fascist Nazi. And there's like no resemblance, at all. And the people couldn't define what fascism is if you asked them. It means
you put
bad.
a gun to their head. They wouldn't know. Yeah.
If a fascist put a gun to your head, what told you had to define fascism?
Well, I guess I had made that connection before I said it.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
It's a bit on the nose, but we'll roll with it.
On the nose. You can always count on me for that.
It's perfect. That's why we have you on. But I do think that's and certainly you should. I can't remember who says it, that like one of the big effects of Christianity on history is it takes it out of a cyclical pattern into a linear one, because there's a definitive end coming. And this is like a radical change for the ancient world, right? To introduce this, because otherwise it's just this continual pattern, and that fits. It has to change your religious outlook as well. If it's linear, or if it's cyclical, you can have plausible things like reincarnations and all this, right? Because stuff's just repeating. But if it's linear, a lot of this becomes more difficult for your deities, that are functioning for you. So, and that, I think, a thoroughly Christian view in that way makes history more interesting, but also more complicated in the way that you're saying. It's not Star Wars. Because you're operating on sort of a different idea of time itself and of a timeline. So I think that's very important. And you see a lot of this in various things publicly, like over the past couple of years. A lot of this confusion manifesting itself in like political debates, especially on the right, is kind of really a debate over how to use and think about history. So I think it's great for historians for you guys, what you want. Here I am again talking about just how everyone keep their jobs. But I do think that's important, and certainly allows there to be, the instructive aspect of history becomes much better that way. I mean, you can read the founders who just live in antiquity, essentially. I can't remember who said that they knew more about Rome and Greece than Europe, because it's what they read. But they're able then to find instructive things, especially for political life, in all sorts of people they don't have to be good guys and bad guys. There's lessons, there's models and anti-models in sort of every epic of history. And that's what you're able to pull from. So it becomes much more useful in that way, if it's not, good guys versus bad guys, and as simple as that. So, in any case, one thing though that I do have a question about for you that I've thought about some, I've written about it a little bit, is in the sort of, if you have the Burkean disposition on conservation, on conserving, this kind of is in the famous debate that a lot of people read between Burke and Paine, right, and Thomas Paine. It does seem to me that the conundrum for us today is that in a certain way, Paine in his spirit is like more useful to us than Burke is, because our proximity to our tradition and our origins is such a large chasm now. Intentionally so. It's been deconstructed. It's been abused. And the things that are like more proximate to us as our American tradition are an aberration of what we actually value and like about our American tradition, which the only point being, it seems to me that conservatives have to be much more radical now if they want to recover anything about what we're talking about, sort of early American, even early 19th century ways of life. To get that back, you'd have to be, unless you just want to conserve the most recent advances of the left, you have to actually be a little destructive. Because what you have is not worth conserving. So it's not just like this. The disposition can't allow itself to be sort of held hostage, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So what is it that we're trying to conserve, I think, is what you're getting at, correct? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And how do we distinguish? How do we decide what that is? because it can't just be, well, I got to hang on to and conserve whatever I have. It's just what we have.
Yeah,
So,
that's or like a traditionalist kind of a take where you just all you care about is the status quo.
Exactly.
And your definition of the status quo is whatever you have since the year 2000 or something like that. Yeah, I agree. I thoroughly agree with that. A conservatism that is only interested in maintaining the status quo is neither interesting nor is it fulfilling in any way. So we conserve the best of Western and American tradition. And when I say Western American tradition, I'm including Christianity in that because Christianity is so central and so essential to Western and American tradition. Christianity is not the only source for Western thought and American thought, but it is salient and it is primary among them. So what are those, and how do we adjudicate between the good tradition, the best of tradition, and some bad traditions? There are bad traditions too, and not all tradition is good. Slavery was a tradition for thousands of years, and not a good tradition. But Americans were not the only ones, but the Americans and the British were the only ones at the time to abolish it. Name any civilization worldwide over the last 4,000 years that ever abolished slavery.
The Muslims are still doing it.
And Muslims are still doing it.
Yeah.
The Muslims were the worst. I mean, in the last 500 years, the Arabs, to be clear, were the worst enslavers, enslaving many millions more Africans and Europeans than the Europeans were ever guilty of. So anyway, all that to say, slavery is a bad tradition. It's morally bad. Then there are other traditions that are really no longer practical for us. So for example, the raising of horses. Now, my cousins have a map of Montana behind me. You see that? The Wilsey side of my family is from Montana, and my cousins raise horses. And lots of fun when you're, kid. When I was a kid growing up, I learned how to ride horses, learned how to be around horses, how to saddle horses, how to brush a horse, how to take care of a horse, how to, shoe a horse and all those things. And those were great lessons for me as a boy and as a young man. Working with horses and riding horses. But they do that because they enjoy it. They don't do it because they have to have a horse in order to get around and do anything. So that tradition is thousands of years old, but it is no longer necessary for social life in the same ways that it was in the past. So that tradition is no longer. It's sort of an anachronism, I should say. So when you adjudicate between traditions that conservatives will conserve, you adjudicate them based on morality, you adjudicate them based on prudence, and certain pragmatic considerations too. When I wrote the book, I zeroed in on a particular tradition, the tradition of the harmony between religion and liberty in America. And because I'm following Tocqueville, because I argue that if religion is not conserved in our country, and I'm thinking especially about Christianity, you call it Judeo-Christianity, you can broaden it out some, but certainly Christianity. If that is lost, then we cannot be free. So the stakes are particularly high. Witness the last 8 days or so. How has our secular culture reacted to the public murder of a person, of a thought leader? How has American culture received that? American culture, as it is, secularized in the way that it is. And there you go. Is that free? Are we a free society when we have a culture that responds those ways? I would say we do not. But we can recover it. because it's integral to our tradition, and conservatives can and must revere that tradition and steward it more faithfully to hand it down.
What do you make of, we had a Joshua Mitchell on not too long ago talking about, of course, his book and other things. On the one hand, I think what we've had since the 50s, especially through the courts, is it's just the working out of it over time. But beginning in the late 40s and early 50s is a sort of nationally mandated, so therefore uniform, already a strange violation of the original intent of the Constitution, but uniform national and sort of enforced public atheism. That's the direction of everything. And I think it's true. Justice Potter Stewart recognizes this in early cases as a sort of lone dissenter in a lot of the Establishment Clause cases. It's like this is not a neutral thing happening where you're just like, hey, we're opening up the playing field. Everyone should participate. This is a faith. On the other hand, I find Joshua's own framing of all this also very compelling. Of there is no secular thing because that's a neutral thing. There is no people are even if you take secular and the literal and proper use of it, just inside of time. There's no people can't live as if they only live in time. They understand eternity. That's theological. And so what we have is this response to Charlie Kirk and other things. This is what bastardized Protestantism looks like. That would be his argument. That's what you have, because the concepts are all still there, with his scapegoating, and you need the sacrifice and you have to purify the people that are in covenant together. All those things are kind of implicitly there. So that's the two sides of it that I wrestle with. If they both make sense in a certain way. Does that complicate the problem for any kind of returning to our particular tradition of where you haven't had a foreign incursion, you've had a degradation of your thing? You can look at the Protestant mainline, whatever. It's really hard for Protestants in this country to correct the liberalism because it's coming in from in-house. Whereas for Catholics and Jews who come and have had more discrete minority status and built their own institutions, it's much easier for them to critique the Protestantism that's the liberal Protestantism because they're outside of it. But once it's your thing and it's totally degraded and you can barely recognize it, that seems like a harder task to me.
Yeah, those ideas that you summarized from Joshua Mitchell, those are my favorite ideas that he advances. I saw him. He gave a talk at Princeton when I was a fellow at Princeton in 2017. And I was just blown away. I mean, I just was blown away. I remember my wife and I were both there, and I was, you go to lectures and sometimes it's interesting. Sometimes it's not so much. I mean, his words were like blazing torches. I mean, everything that came out of his mouth. And I remember that. I remember he was talking about that very topic in that talk. And I think that, yes, if I may go back to Dulles for a second, Avery Dulles, when he read Confessions, he was deeply moved by Confessions, so he started going to church, and he had been an agnostic really to that point, but he started going to church because he was looking for answers, and he was Presbyterian, so he went to a Presbyterian church. And it was liberal. It was just utterly liberal. So he was like, well, that didn't really help. So he went to Methodist. He went to a Baptist. They're all liberal up in Cambridge, Massachusetts. He said, well, shoot, I'll go to a Catholic church. And he went to the Catholic church and, let there be light. And there was light. Because as you just pointed out, minority groups like Catholics came and formed their own institutions and maintained their own identity very jealously and scrupulously. And the result for Avery Dulles, John Foster Dulles' son, was a conversion and an awakening. And it changed the entire course of his life. And he became one of the most influential theologians of the 20th century in a good way. So in that sense, yes, a degraded theological concept of guilt, stain, and atonement, which Josh Mitchell talks about. When it's degraded, it becomes a death dealer, because as he says, you have this theological idea of guilt and stain, but no possibility of atonement, and that's death dealing. But on the other hand, if we could see this from a glass half full perspective, when you have a bastard child, you do have a child. And your response is not kill the child. Your response is to take the child in, adopt the child, and catechize the child and rejuvenate him. And so in a sense, at least conservatives have something to begin with, something identifiable in society, even in a secular or a anti-God atheistic society. We can point out and say, where does this idea come from? This idea of guilt and stain. It's not wrong. It's not wrong. What's wrong is that there's not only possibility of reconciliation and redemption, there's a certainty about it. If you lay hold of the truths of Christianity, and that's our point of departure. Maybe this is a point of departure more than it is a reason for despair. What do you think of that?
Yeah, no, I think this is the, what's the contra Benjamin Franklin? What's the admirable thing to do with the bastard child? It's to recognize, by recognizing them, you're recognizing the fault that produced them. So that's, you're sort of taking ownership, right? That yes, this one does belong to me. He's illegitimate, but I'm going to legitimize him and adopt him in as normal, because at least he does belong to me in this way, genealogical way, which I think especially evangelicals, like, this is tough for us to do with liberal Protestantism and all that it's wrought, is to sort of own it. We constantly run around and are like, no, I never knew him. I have nothing to do with those people. They're something else, because we don't want to own which I think, as you're pointing out, would be the sort of first step to trying to offer corrective, into fixing this in a way. And you're right that the pulling from Mitchell, these concepts that are sort of the meta concepts, maybe only subconsciously, are legitimate and good. I mean, it's like we have it's like if you had racialist hyper Calvinists, like that's what we have. There's like no, there's very little possibility for it. We're really going to preach the law and preach sin hard, and the condemnation hard, without any sort of gentleness. And any room for allowing people to doubt, or any of this. So I think that's right. I mean, it's once, it looks thoroughly Protestant from that view, and it's just gone off the rails. But, so I think it goes, to answer your question, goes both ways. In some sense, it's more difficult because it's in-house, it's easier to criticize from the outside. On the other hand, as you're saying, we have the shared, unlike some of the other religious minority groups that have been influential, right, we have more shared language and concepts that help us make sense of it. And possibly, if the corrective comes, it has to come from Protestants. I thoroughly believe that it's a Protestant country, always has been, still is, just by sheer numbers.
Still is.
And all of its things are Protestant, even its bad things. So it's got to come from Protestants. But let's see after that rabbit trail. I was just interested in your thoughts on that, but I think they're good. What should we say now? We kind of close out with this topic with given what you've established of, like, to have religious freedom. There's a certain disposition that's required, which conservatives have. There's certain understanding between liberty or freedom and religion and how these go together. And this requires, in general, the Christian mores that Tocqueville recognized and talked about, and those have to be maintained. How does this work now with the insane, from an 1833 perspective, insane level of religious diversity you have now, especially large pockets of it?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not just that it's diverse, which is always like a political problem when people are different, like figuring out how to live together is a challenge to be solved, but they're diametrically opposed, and they have been allowed to flourish, especially Islam and other, crazy secular things, been allowed to flourish because of the doctrine of religious freedom and religious liberty as it's been developed. So what's the, how does this complicate it for us now in terms of the conservation? Because it would seem to allow these enemies of the necessary Christianity to also maintain their status and continue.
Yep. I think okay. So I think that you said something a second ago that was intriguing towards the end of your question, that religious groups are in the country and are allowed to be here and allowed to practice their faith, even though they're opposed to traditional American ideas and ideals, because of religious freedom and the way that we have understood it is the way you said it. That is right. I agree with you, but I would say that that our application and understanding of what religious freedom is completely been perverted from its original meaning, and in so many ways. And what you're putting your finger on, we could talk about lots of different ways that religious freedom has been misunderstood, misconstrued, misapplied from its original intent. But what you just are asking about there is as a result of a sentimental view of kindness and compassion to immigrants who come here, often illegally, or refugees that, come here and are seeking for asylum. But nevertheless, in both cases, they want to come here and they don't want to be assimilated into a traditional American culture. So they don't want to speak the language. They want to impose Sharia law, for example, up in Dearborn, Michigan. Mm-hmm. They as we saw in the riots in California a few months ago, they want to come here and have no regard for the laws, but then take advantage of the benefits that citizens have in terms of education, in terms of healthcare, and things of that nature. Those ways in which they refuse to assimilate, we allow that in the name of some unmoored idea of kindness or compassion. And religious freedom, in the way that that it was originally understood, was never some kind of license to behave in any way that you want. We have a constitution, Timon, of course, but we also have an unwritten constitution. There are, and I just hate to say it's like a broken record, but there are traditional patterns of American life that are ordinary, that are easy to miss, and therefore easy to dismiss as being unimportant, like speaking the language, like speaking English. When you go to school as a first grader and you don't speak any English, but everybody else does, then the entire school then conforms to you. When actually, no, you need to conform, your family needs to conform to that local elementary school. That's just, that's not only part of an American tradition, it's also just common sense. And yet, we ask our entire society to conform and adhere to a completely foreign element, and abandon our own traditions, and abandon our way of life, and abandon our laws and our order and our tradition in the name of some amorphous, sentimentalized, romantic view of compassion. I don't even know what it is. Mm-hmm. Just like the left's view of reality. And if you don't agree with it, then you're not compassionate. That's the problem. The problem is not religious freedom. The problem is a leftist and romantic perversion of what religious freedom means. No, Barack Obama, it does not mean freedom of worship. It does not mean that. No, ACLU, it does not mean you can do whatever you want in the four walls of your church and in private, but you can't express it in public. That's not American tradition. That is tyranny. That's totalitarianism. Just like you just said a second ago in talking about Mitchell, that we have this atheized society that has been pressed down upon us. That's not American. So, to close things out, the book is about conservatism. It's about religious freedom. But one thing I do hope that it's about is what does it mean to be an American? And I hope that it inspires conversations especially among young people about what does it mean to be an American? And we should love America and protect America and its traditions and its ways of life.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that is I'm sure others have said it, is like the question of our time is who are we? What's an American? That's beneath, that question being answered is beneath everything else, it seems to me. Not just even the immigration question, but all these cultural ones as well.
Right.
And until that's defined and broadly accepted and then acted upon, these issues you only have Band-Aid solutions to most of them. That has to be, as you said, not only just understood, but embraced and sort of loved by people. There's all kinds of impediments to that, which some are bad history, like we were discussing earlier, of what America is or was, what an American is. And then there's those that, whether through history or other means, are just actually do hate it, and you can't have those things if you're going to have a cohesive polity, not at scale. You'll always have people that are dissenters. That's fine, but not at scale. And it's just been sort of mass psychosis in this way. So I hope it's inspirational for people in that way as well, or helps them think about that, because I do think it's the question. And for those of us that don't have any direct power over other policy corrections, that's what we should really be answering in the cultural space.
I love the way you said that. Yeah, that's right.
In any case, I think it's a great note to end on, because that's the question, and it's whether we're talking about religion or even our own sort of political dispositions, it has to have an answer for that. Thank you for coming on again, John. I've already kept it longer than I said I would, and we probably got way off topic many times, but it's great. I love talking to you, and
same.
We'll of course put a link to the book in the show notes, so everyone can go pick it up, and I encourage you to do so. Anything you want to plug that you're working on now, that you new projects or anything like that, to have people looking out for it?
Yeah, in February, I have another book coming out called God and Country, Upholding Faith, History, and American Identity. And this is a book for pastors. It's a short book. It's only about 150 pages long. And it's a book about thinking historically in order to think civically and think about rightly ordered patriotism.
Okay, excellent.
So that'll be out in February. That'll come out in February. Yes.
Okay.
But you can pre-order it.
Of course.
It can be pre-ordered.
There we go. Of course. All right. We'll put a link in there for that as well.
Yeah.
You have to hawk your wares in these situations.
That's right. That's exactly
what it's
right.
all about.
If you don't do it, nobody's going to do it for you, man.
That's right. Excellent. Well, John, always good to talk to you, man. And thank you so much for coming on. And listener, thank you for tuning in as always. And do subscribe and all that so you don't miss our episodes. And until next time, God bless.
You can find American Reformer on the internet at www.americanreformer.org or on x.com, formerly Twitter, at AM Reformer. Don't forget to like, rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast. Please consider supporting us today by making a tax-deductible donation through our secure online donation portal at AmericanReformer.org. That's AmericanReformer.org.